So again, welcome to the Self-Determination Program Overview, which is a Connections California presentation from Parents Helping Parents. Connections California Transition to Adulthood is an online resource and information hub, and we address the needs of transition to adulthood and adult services for families and individuals with disabilities. And we are a statewide program, so we like to reach people throughout the state of California. This evening, we are very grateful, and our audience is very lucky to have two of the self-determination program heavy hitters in the state of California. We have Katie Hornberger joining us, and Katie's career has been spent working with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. She was an early intervention teacher. She taught special education. She did in-home behavioral intervention for children with autism. She was an educational consultant vendor with the Frank D. Lanterman Regional Center. And then she joined Disability Rights California as a client's rights advocate in the Office of Clients' Rights Advocacy. So yes, we do have an attorney in the house. She became a supervisor there and then became the director of the Office of Clients' Rights Advocacy. Katie also managed the Work Incentives Program Assistance Grant for 3 counties and the statewide Office of Payee Review and Beneficiary Assistance at DRC. So this is a broad range of knowledge we have here. And Katie came to DDS in September of 2021 to set up the Office of the Self-Determination Ombudsperson and is currently serving as that acting ombudsperson as we speak. Also joining us this evening is Susie Reckworth, who is a champion of the person-driven or person-centered approach, knowing that when families have the opportunity to think and engage in a person-centered way, it enriches the partnerships between family and their regional center. That was a quote from her. Susie has worked in a variety of jobs supporting individuals and with developmental disabilities in Illinois and Pennsylvania before, thankfully, coming to San Diego and working at the San Diego Regional Center. There for several years and then became the regional manager and project manager of the self-determination program at the San Diego Regional Center. Susie then served as the ombudsperson for the self-determination program at Department of Developmental Services and now is the assistant deputy director for the Home and Community-Based Services and Self-Determination Program Branch, Policy and Program Development Division, California Department of Developmental Services. Phew. Okay, I'm going to let Susie take it away. And thank you again for coming.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. You really pumped Katie and I up. It's much appreciated. It's great to be here. I am going to pull up a slideshow because what's a presentation without some slides, right? All right. So yeah, again, thanks for having us. Self-determination is definitely a hot topic out there right now and has been. The program is growing. It's growing pretty fast right now compared to the growth we've seen in previous years. So it's definitely on a lot of people's minds. So tonight's training or presentation is really an overview of what self-determination is. Some of you in this audience may be very familiar with self-determination. You may be participating in self-determination right now or in the process of it, or you maybe haven't heard of it or know very little about it. So the presentation is geared towards giving everyone that overview of what it is and why it might be a choice that would work for you or for a family member you're supporting. And then we'll talk. Katie will talk through what the SCP Ombudsperson Office can do and how to get a hold of them. So I think I just read through my own agenda before I got to the slide. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. Okay. So I'm guessing that the majority of people here are familiar with regional center services in general. But let's take a look at where self-determination actually fits into this broad category of regional center services. So you may or may not have heard this term, so I just want to make sure we're all understanding. If a person is in self-determination, and you see that purple circle on the right, we would, say they're a SDP or self-determination participant. if someone's not in self-determination, which is the huge majority of people that receive regional center services, those are called traditional vendored services. So referring to a service as traditional may not be something you've heard before, but that's how we're differentiating. This is a person in self-determination, and this is a person in traditional services. So you can see from this visual that self-determination and traditional services are two separate things. They're all services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. A lot of the services a person can use through either system can be very similar or even identical, but they exist in our system as two separate ways to access the service. And I bring that up because we get the question a lot, can I just do a little bit of self-determination? Can I just try a little bit? The short answer is no. You either have to choose self-determination or traditional services. But I also included this green circle here, which is participant-directed services. I'm not going to talk about this tonight other than to point it out for those of you that maybe that sounded good. Can I just try a little bit of self-determination? Participant-directed services is the option we have that, it's not self-determination, but it does give a person more authority over who's providing their services and what those services look like. But you'll notice it's encompassed within the traditional service system. All right. A few key things to note. Self-determination is entirely voluntary. Nobody has to be a participant of self-determination. It's absolutely by the choice of that participant or their family, if their family is involved. And again, it's not different dramatically as far as the types of services and supports that are available. It's still supports geared towards supporting someone with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but it is a different way to get those services. And one of the big differences is this ability to have more freedom, more control, and more responsibility in choosing services and supports that, of course, still they meet your IPP goals, but having more of that control of what the services look like, who provides the services, and where those services are accessed. So let's talk a little bit about, actually, I do want to go back to that last bullet point. In self-determination, there's still a regional center, there's still a service coordinator, so that basic support system that's there for traditional services is still intact in self-determination. There's a couple of other roles that are important in self-determination that you may not be familiar with. We'll talk a little bit about these as I go through the enrollment process, but one of those is a financial management service provider. So in self-determination, there's an individual budget, and we're going to talk about that. So there's an amount of money involved. That money is managed by a financial management service. So as we talk about this, none of the money that we're talking about goes to the participant or to their family to then figure out how to pay people or pay for their services. There's a financial management service that does all of that component. And there's another role that is different. This is not a role that exists in the traditional service system, and that's called an independent facilitator. So because self-determination is this program where a person and their family is taking on a lot more responsibility for coordinating their own services, finding services, some people say, yeah, I could use a little bit of help with that. And they decide that they want to find a professional to help them put those services and supports in place. All right. So this is the roadmap of what it looks like to enroll in self-determination. So you all are doing some really great preliminary steps right now if you're just here to to get some initial learning about self-determination, because this gives you an idea of what this program might do for you or for your child. Once you decide, yeah, I think I really want to pursue this, the first thing you're going to do is attend an orientation. So there's a few different ways you can access the orientation. There's a statewide orientation put on by the State Council on Developmental Disabilities. Many of the regional centers offer an orientation. So however you get your orientation, that box checked off, that's the starting point. After you've done that, you're going to move into this orange person on the road. You're going to move into person-centered planning. Hopefully that's not a brand new term for most of us here. Person-centered planning it's important in all services, and it's important for traditional services, participant-directed services, and of course in self-determination. It takes on a slightly different significance and role in self-determination, because having a person-centered plan is really that opportunity to create a vision for how to put services and supports in place, what that looks like, and goes a bit beyond what like an individual program plan does, and that it's not just about regional center services, it's about a person's entire life and how all of that comes together, including regional center services, to move that person forward where they want to go in life. So person-centered planning is actually something that you can receive funding for during the enrollment process into self-determination. So you can actually work with a professional person-centered planner to help facilitate that process. It's not required though. You can also skip right over, but we highly encourage people to take advantage of that resource that's available right now. So the big step in getting your self-determination plan together and ready to go is figuring out how much money you have. So I'm just going to take a step back from our roadmap for just a second and explain the big picture. So in traditional services, you have whatever service it is that you're using. It could be respite, attending conferences, independent living supports. There's a whole range of services. And as we all know, those services cost a certain amount of money. And a regional center knows exactly how much money they've spent on an individual services and supports in a 12-month period. The idea in self-determination is, hey, all of this money is being spent on my services and supports. If I had a little more control over how that money got spent, I would do things differently, and through that, be able to have my needs met better. So the individual budget is that dollar amount that the regional center would have spent on services in the traditional system that is now available for a participant to use in the way that works best for them. That's a very simplified version of it. There's a lot of rules that go along with it. But rules aside, the way it's set up does provide for a lot more authority, as you can imagine, for someone to say, hey, I know how much money I have, and here's how much I want to spend on this and what I want to spend on this. And that's what's called the spending plan. So after you know how much money you have, then you start thinking, what I would call the fun part, you start thinking about how you actually want to spend that money to have your services and supports in place that are going to be in line with IPP goals and person-centered plan goals. And that's the arranging services component. And part of arranging services is finding the financial management service that's required. You have to have a financial management service. If you're using an independent facilitator to help with this process or help you after you're enrolled in self-determination, you'd want to start arranging that service as well. And finally, you've got all your ducks in a row. You've got that amount of money. You know how you're going to spend it. You know who's going to help you spend it, which is your financial management service. And everyone's ready to go. then the official enrollment takes place. And at that point, traditional services are no longer available unless you decide to withdraw from self-determination, which you can do at any time. But all the traditional services would be discontinued, and the day you enroll in self-determination, now all of your services are going through that spending plan that you've created. So again, self-determination and traditional services have a lot of similarities, but you have to, you can be in one or you can be in the other. They can't happen at the same time. I think I explained most of this as I went through the roadmap, so I won't spend a lot of time here, but this is just a breakdown of the components that you see in traditional services, and then all of the things that you see in self-determination. So you can see, yes, there's some overlap. There's still an individual program plan. There's still vendor providers if you choose to use them. But there's all of these other things in self-determination too. For instance, you don't have to use a vendor provider. You can use non-vendor providers. You can hire your own staff and they don't have to work for a vendor provider. And when I say vendor provider, that would be, for instance, a respite agency or a day program. So self-determination has a lot more components to it that may not be as familiar to those of you more well-versed in traditional service systems. This one bullet point here I didn't talk about, the one that says services and supports must be eligible for federal financial participation. And you might read that and think, I have no idea what that means. It's not a common phrase we use. Basically what that means is, this goes back to the rules component of self-determination. When you decide how to spend your money, you have a lot more freedom and flexibility, but you still have to meet these rules. And those rules are part of the federal funding system that states are connected with. So any service that you choose to purchase has to meet all of the federal requirements. And there's a lot of information out there about what that means, but just in a nutshell, that's what that bullet point is referring to. All right, and so everything about self-determination, we always try to bring back to the 5 principles of the program. This is really, at its essence, what self-determination is about. So you can see, I talked a lot about it: freedom, authority, support, and being able to pick the supports that will help you live the life you want to live. Responsibility, that's a big one. You're taking on a lot more freedom and a lot more authority, but that also means you're taking on a lot more responsibility. And there's a lot of help to help you manage that responsibility, but it's still a core principle of what self-determination is. And the confirmation principle that you are truly the one making decisions in your life. Yeah. All right, and this is just a slide that shows some quotes from people who have been participants in self-determination and what it's done for them. So you can read through some of these, and I think I've provided the materials for you all so that you can read through these again. But I like this quote in the bottom left. The biggest lesson in responsibility, he says, he has learned in the SDP is to stay on budget. His advice is to make sure you create a budget plan and be sure to stick to the plan. And I like that, not so much for the budget component, although that's a very important part, but I like it because they emphasize how important planning is in self-determination. And that kind of brings it back to, this is an opportunity to really create a person-centered life for yourself or for a family member, where that's what the planning is all about. It's about creating the life that you want to have. So I like the planning component. All right, so hopefully you have kind of a high level understanding of what self-determination is and how it's different from traditional services. But why would somebody want self-determination as an option. So here's some reasons people choose to go into self-determination. People may want more flexibility in the support that they're able to access. So an example might be, yeah, respite care is really helpful, but the respite agency, they come to my home and they're at my home with my child. And what I think my child would really do better with is if they came and took him or her out to go do something, and maybe I get a few hours in my house by myself, a little respite in my own home, right? So you have more flexibility in what the service looks like. The ability to determine how funds are spent. So you have the ability to negotiate the rates you're paying for services, to decide how much you want to spend on one thing versus another thing. So you have more flexibility in that. Some people go to self-determination because they want to use providers that are not vendored with a regional center, or they want to hire their own staff. You can't do that you can't do that to the extent you can in self-determination in traditional services. Some people choose to use their budget to get a gym membership to meet some of the health-related goals, or they might take a community class at the local rec center. Those aren't places that are vendored by regional centers, but in an SDP you have that flexibility. And then some people like SDP because they have more freedom to find providers that speak their language, understand their culture, provide the services in the places that work best for them. And there are services that you can use in self-determination that do not exist in the traditional system. So some things that you wouldn't, there's no vendored acupuncture therapists in the traditional system, but that is something that a person might choose to use their self-determination fund for. I will say that's a very rare one, but it is there. All right, so if you haven't gotten scared off and you're still thinking you're interested in self-determination and you want to know what to do next, we talked about the orientation, and also you want to talk to your service coordinator at your regional center and let them know, hey, I'm learning about this. I think it's something I might want to do. I attended an orientation. If you've done that, what are my next steps with the regional center? So that you can get started with the steps that the regional center is going to work with you on. And there's a lot of, there's a growing community of natural supports out there, families and parents that are in self-determination now and really working with one another to share lessons learned and things like that. All right, let me make sure I'm leaving enough time. I get really verbose when I talk about self-determination. This is my last slide though. Transition supports. So that roadmap, there's a lot of steps on that roadmap. It's okay and expected that people are going to need some help while they're on that road. I talked a bit about independent facilitators. That's often a resource people will look to. But service coordinators are also there to support during that process. There are local volunteer advisory committees at every regional center. Most of them meet monthly and they're open to the public. So that's also a great place to network and learn more about self-determination. But one thing that committee does is designates ways to spend a certain amount of money that's allocated to them on helping people during the transition process. And then, as I mentioned, there is funding currently for people that want to have work with a professional person-centered planner to put together that person-centered plan. All right, Katie, I'm going to hand it to you.
Great, thank you so much. So I was reading the questions in the chat, and I think you all have a lot of the same questions everyone has. Is like, how could this work for me? When the state invented a new program, started rolling it out, they also rolled out an Office of the Ombudsperson to support people in that journey. And when people had questions, had a place to call, or if they encountered barriers, had a place that they could call. And there's actually a law that established the office of the ombudsperson. And next slide. And what we do is we provide information, we assist regional center families, and we do that by trying to facilitate disputes. We investigate complaints. We actually report periodically to the legislature, and we can recommend changes to the department and to the legislature. And Susie and I actually work together a lot on those changes of how can we, really improve this program and make it the best program it can be. And so we talk a lot about changes and implement them. And next slide. Some of the things that ombudsperson doesn't do is we don't decide disputes. If you and the regional center are in a dispute about what's in your budget, we're not going to pick one of you and call you the winner. We don't represent people in hearing. I am a lawyer, but my days of going to hearings are over. And we don't make recommendations to courts or hearing officers, and we don't overturn hearing decisions. We're really more in that support role to help people directly solve problems and then use that information that we're gathering from individual callers to recommend systemic change. And next slide. Our goal is to increase the number of people in the program. We want to reduce how long it takes. I saw there was a question about how long it takes to get into the program. We want to shorten that time of it, and then of course make policy change. The other thing we do is if you call our office, we send a satisfaction survey out because we want to make sure that everyone is being served well. And last slide. How to get information about us. We have a website. You can email sdp.ombudsperson@dds.ca.gov. On our website, there's an intake form, or you can call us at the toll-free number listed there on the slide, 877-658-9731. We also have an office that handles land treatment issues. So if maybe you've decided that SDP is not for you, but you still have some questions or need some support about accessing your regional center services, we have staff that do that too. And I oversee that office also. So you've had Susie and I talk as fast as we can. Those are some other resources about SDP. Does everyone know what directives are? Directives are guidance from the department to the regional center to do something. And there's Susie also put a list of service definitions in there because in our culture, we use so many acronyms that it can get overwhelming sometimes. And knowing what we mean by social recreation as compared with what a regular person just living their life means, that's important. So that link to the service definitions is really helpful.
I thank you so much. Thank you, Beatrice, for being with us as always. Thank you, Susie and Katie. Your wisdom is beyond, and we were very lucky to have you. I think everybody sees that now, like I was saying in the beginning of the hour. So thanks again for coming. Remember, for the Spanish speakers, we have the SDP in Spanish next week and the parent panel, and check out the rest of the remaining fall season for Connections California. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Everyone, good night.
Take care.